Welcome to Half Hour Call, the podcast where we talk about live theater, TV, film, basically anything entertainment. I'm your host, Rich Kless. Our guest today is a member of the Actors Equity Association, whose professional credits include numerous Broadway, off-Broadway, and national touring productions. Most recently, she understudied and performed all the female roles in the smash Broadway hit Jersey Boys. Her voice has been heard across the airwaves for ESPN Magazine, Comcast, Dish Network, and Disney Cruise Line, as well as the animated series Hairport. Favorite stage roles, both off-Broadway and touring, included Gloria Thorpe in Damn Yankees, Belle in Beauty and the Beast, Charity in Sweet Charity, Peggy Sawyer in 42nd Street, Maggie in A Chorus Line. As an educator, she's brought her love of performance to children's theater programs across the country, from Colorado to North Carolina. In 2012, she and her husband, Dr. David Overton, created Long Island Classic Stage Company and Classic Kids, introducing children across the North Shore of Long Island to Shakespeare and the classics in a fun and engaging way. Currently, she's the head of recruitment for Malloy CAP21 Musical Theater BFA program, and she herself holds a BA in English and Theater from Providence College. Please welcome Rebecca Overton. Rebecca, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Rich. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So I'm going to start off with my first question I've asked every one of my guests so far, all three of them. What made you want to be an entertainer to start off?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know that I ever thought about doing this as a career, to be perfectly honest. I started singing at church when I was very young. I was, a Catholic family, Catholic church-going family. My mom was the director of music at a church in Centerport, New York. And I started cantering, for you lay people who are not Catholic. That's basically just means being a song leader. You're standing up in front of the congregation, aka the audience, and you're just singing the hymns. And I didn't know any better. I didn't know to be nervous about it. I just knew what the hymns were because I had been being dragged to church on Sunday since I was born. And so I started cantering when I was 12 years old. And no one ever taught me how to sing. I just sang. And I always enjoyed being on stage. I went to like a little local dance studio that was really more of like a recital factory. It was not so much about the dance technique. It was more about the performance aspect. It was like, okay, Rebecca, you know how to sing, so you're going to get up and you're going to sing The Sun'll Come Out Tomorrow, and then you're going to tap. Right. And it was like, truly like Dolly Dinkle's dance studio, but in the best way, It taught me how to just kind of go with it and be on stage. And okay, now you're going to do a ballet solo after singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Like, it was ridiculous and comical, but at the same time, the parents loved it. I had no idea that there was anything else to it. And so like, that was kind of how I started performing. And then I decided that I liked it kind of a lot. And so I went to Holy Trinity High School in Hicksville, which is where I met you, my friend, and did lots of theater at Trinity Theater, which at the time was like the best high school theater in the country. Like, no one had discovered that you could actually do this and do it well, except for our teacher and mentor, Jim Hoare, who was just phenomenal. So we're doing these like college level shows at the high school level, which was, again, unheard of, back in the dark ages when we were kids. And I guess all through that, it was like, I knew that Broadway was a thing, but I didn't really know that you could go to school for it. That was still at the time where BFA programs were, there was only like 6 of them. There was like
absolutely. I mean,
NYU, like it didn't exist. You know what I mean? It was like you could do it, but it wasn't necessarily an educational path. So I went to Providence College thinking that I was going to be a doctor because I also really liked biology and I always loved medicine. I didn't follow that path, ended up, declaring an English major and a theater major by default because it was like I was doing so much theater for fun that my advisor was like, well, if you just take this stagecraft class and, one more, lecture class, you have a theater major. I was like, okay.
Right.
And so I graduated with an English and theater degree, but still with no concept that I could make a living
Mm,
doing this. And long story short, I fell into it. I went to an open call for 42nd Street, the national tour of 42nd Street, on a dare,
okay.
literally on a dare. I didn't know 42nd Street. I hadn't tapped since, circa,
Right.
1982
Right.
in Miss Ann's dance studio. And I was working at the time at Hershey Park in Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
which is where I kind of grew up going like over the summers. That was like our summer
Right.
vacation. So I had auditioned to do their summer theater shows just for fun, booked that, again, still just for fun. And I took a bus into New York City like Peggy Sawyer does, not knowing the show at all. Showed up on the wrong day, as Peggy Sawyer does. They were seeing agent appointments. They were seeing Dorothy's and Maggie's, the character actresses. For some reason, they decided to let me stay. I waited the whole day reading my book because we didn't have phones back
Right.
then.
No.
I'm sitting there just wait until they were done with all of like these older character actresses. And I was like, all right, let's see what happens. So they're like, so what role are you here for? And I said, oh, I don't really know the show. My friend Jeremiah told me that I'd be a good Peggy. And they were like, huh, okay. Oh, well, why don't you come on in, Rebecca, and we're going
Right.
to have you, sing. So I had one song. I didn't have a book. I didn't have,
Right.
a repertoire.
Right.
No, I had sheet music to
Right.
Le Jazz Hot from Victor Victoria,
Yeah.
the only song that I knew how to sing at that point.
Exactly.
So I sang Le Jazz Hot, for
Mm,
42nd Street. And they're like, okay. They give me some sides to read. So I read for Peggy. And, that seemed to go well. And then the choreographer who was there, because these were apparently like agent callbacks, I was like at the end of the process and didn't know it.
okay.
They had me tap and they taught me Peggy's combination. They were like, are you a tapper? And I said, oh, yeah, I used to be. I tapped when I was a kid.
Right.
Tapped. They were like, okay, great. And where did you come from? And I just said, oh, Hershey, Pennsylvania. And they were like, thinking that they're being punked here,
Right.
they're like looking around, like, where's the candid camera?
Right.
And I left, went back on the bus, back to Hershey, PA, didn't give it a second thought. 2 days later, I got a call from the producer saying, "You are literally Peggy Sawyer.
Yeah.
You
That's
you are
exactly it.
our Peggy." So I went out on the road on a national tour of of 42nd Street as Peggy Sawyer, and that's the story, and I'm sticking to it.
There
That
you
was
go.
kind of my first big credit, and then I kept auditioning and kind of started to see that there was an industry here. I got my equity card at Goodspeed in Connecticut, and then booked a Broadway show from an open call when I was like 26.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you get to that point where you just, hey, they keep asking me to come back, so I'm doing something right. I got to be.
I guess, I mean, and there were don't get me wrong, there were plenty of disappointments. Like once I realized like how much I really
Right.
wanted to do this and how little I knew about it, I was like, I was so green. I was so green and so naive. So I know I blew so many auditions, but
Oh,
I booked some really good ones, so that I guess sort of made up for all of the fool of myself that I made
right.
in many a New York City room back in the 90s.
Right. Well, I mean, and it's about the training. It's about getting, having those people in advance of going do those things to tell you this is what to expect. Again, we didn't really have that. Like, again, I went to at a high school, I went to AMDA, which is now one of the biggest, conservatories
Mhm.
in the country as far as, but when I went there, it wasn't even an accredited university. It was a certificate program.
Right.
And
Because it was like you're just getting the training. It wasn't
right.
so much about the degree. It was like
It
figuring
was
out
it was
like
like
in that process.
you want to get on to gigs, this is how you do it. It's
Yes.
not it's the into the research and the work and stuff. That's part of the job, as far as you know.
And you know what? There's something to be said for that,
Right.
especially back then. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk more about this later, but there weren't too many educated
No,
people that they were comparing us to.
right.
So the vast majority of us were out there kind of learning on the job.
Right. Like you said, you got a degree in English. If you wanted to do anything that had to do, because that's where you read the shows and the plays and
Sure.
Shakespeare and stuff like that. You did that in an English class,
Right.
before they, and then somebody along the way went, hey, let's make this a special. And they've done that across the university in every subject. I mean, it's become now you can, study, microbiology at a specific level and all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
it's become very specialized. But so tell me a little bit about specifically about CAP21 for a second. What
Sure.
what is it? It's I know it's part of Malloy University, but what is the CAP21 program?
So CAP21 has a really interesting history. So CAP21 used to be a part of NYU.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if you're probably familiar with the fact that NYU has what they call a studio system. So if you
Right.
audition for Tisch School of the Arts,
Hmm.
you get into Tisch School of Drama, and then they place you in the studio that they think is going to be the best fit for you. You may want musical theater, but you may not get musical theater. They
Right.
might
Right.
place you in Meisner or Stella Adler or like
Excuse me a
Devise.
second. Oh, okay. Sorry. Go back to you were talking about CAP21.
Yeah, so Cap 21 used to be a part of NYU Tisch School of the Arts. So it was their musical theater studio. So students who were interested in pursuing musical theater and also going to NYU could potentially be placed in this Cap
Right.
21 studio where they would do their musical theater training alongside their NYU Gen Ed credits and whatever else was required by NYU. Um, I think that Cap 21 was founded in like the mid 1990s
Okay.
and stayed with NYU until 2011. And there were a lot of really well-known graduates like Matthew Morrison, who was on
Yep.
Smash.
Hmm.
Smash, is that what he was on? No, Glee. Glee, Glee,
Glee.
Glee.
Who's on Glee?
That's, yeah, I'm sorry.
That's
I'm
okay.
confusing my musical theater shows. Glee, Krista Rodriguez, who's had, a great deal of success. Kristen Bell, she was the voice of Anna in Frozen, and she's been in a million TV shows since. So those were all CAP 21 graduates, along with like a ton of Broadway people.
Right.
So, but kind of the model, I guess, of CAP 21, really the model of the studios at the time. Again, I can't speak to it right now. I don't know if it's the same thing, but they were sort of independently owned and operated.
Gotcha.
So, like NYU was sort of like the parent school, and then they would like farm it out to these studios. Um, and so sometime in 2010, 2011, the owners of Cap 21, my understanding, it was way before my time,
Hmm.
they decided that they weren't getting enough funding from NYU to kind of do all the things that they wanted to do. So they decided to break away from NYU and actually go to that AMDA certificate model. So
Right.
for like 3 years, Cap 21 was operating as a pre-professional training center, pre-professional training studio, where you would go for whatever it was, whatever the curriculum was, 18 months, 24 months, and you would train in musical theater,
Right.
and then you would graduate with a musical theater certificate. And that worked for quite a while, but my understanding is that like the kind of growth was challenging because they maybe bit off a little more than they could chew. They rented out a whole second floor in anticipation of,
Right.
continuing this model. That became hard to kind of administrate. So somehow they started looking for a university again to kind of partner with. And Malloy University at the time, the president of Malloy, a really lovely man named Drew Bogner, his son happened to be a Broadway producer. So his
Okay.
son, Ryan, was, kind of doing the rounds as a producer, checking out new works in New York City. So Cap 21 had started running, in addition to this pre-professional training company, they started running a theater company as well, where they were producing new works at night.
Gotcha.
So Ryan was aware of this CAP21 model, went to his dad, said, "Hey, I think they're looking for a partner." And so that's how the Malloy CAP21 started as a partnership, and then ultimately Malloy bought out CAP21.
Gotcha.
So the owners went away, and it became Malloy's musical theater program.
Program. Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's sort of the history, and that was in like 2014, I think, was our first year operating as a kind of unit, a Malloy CAP21 degree.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I have a former student of mine and my wife's who graduated, I think, from this when it was the certificate,
Yeah.
in a young man named Gideon Chicos. Um, and he's just finished a like 3-year run with Book of Mormon on tour.
Oh, wow.
Um, so, but he was always talking up, oh, when I was at Cap 21, oh, when I was,
Yeah,
you
it's I mean
know,
it's a great it's undergone some change, but a lot of our professors are actually still there, which I think
right,
kind of speaks well to the kind of the mission, if you will, of the
right.
program. You know, Cap 21, which I didn't know, um I started there in 2017, and I think it was like 2019 before I knew it actually stood for something. So it stands for Collaborative Arts Project for the 21st Century.
Ah, okay, there you go.
And,
That's all
I
in
think,
the acronym there.
right? And I was like, it stands for something. It would have been nice if you all told me. I'm like the head
Right,
of recruitment and I'm
right,
promoting this program, and like the mission is right there, you know?
right, exactly. So what is again, so we're going to talk about a little bit it's definitely a conservatory setting in terms of how the semester, what's a typical, can you tell me about a typical semester for a student,
Sure.
what they're doing when they get there?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is very, very different for us is that our model is such that um, students spend time on both the main campus, which is on the South Shore of Long Island in Rockville Center, and then the CAP21 studios, which are now located at 50 Broadway, which is a space that we kind of gutted and renovated. We have the whole fourth floor of this
Gotcha.
building in Lower Manhattan. So the model is such that first year students will spend 2 days a week in New York City doing their kind of intensive musical theater conservatory training. And then so that's right now, that's like a Monday and a Wednesday. Then Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, our students will be on the main Malloy campus, which is where they take their gen eds, their electives, and some of their studio classes as well. So the faculty goes back and forth. The faculty teaches on both campuses, but it's like either a city day or it's a campus day. So that's kind of the way it works. So it's cool for students who don't know if they're quite ready to be in New York City, living there as a
Hmm.
17, 18-year-old. They might want a college campus, but they kind of want to be close to a city, and
Right,
they're like excited about the idea of training in New York City, but it might be a little too overwhelming. Or for their parents too. I mean, this is like a good, you being from Long Island,
yeah,
you know how suburban Long Island is. And once they
right,
kind of come out and see, like, oh, this isn't so scary. I mean, these are kids from all over the country, even the world. I mean, we're starting to get like international applicants now. And we literally just this past weekend had this, adorable boy from Lincoln, Nebraska, who had never been to New York before. It was his first time in New York auditioning and happened to be for our program. So, he was just so excited and wrote me a thank you note today, a little thank you email saying like, thank you so much for making this experience so amazing. You were all so kind and it was not at all what I expected.
right.
And I think sometimes they're like, God only knows what they're thinking they're going to get in New York City. And it turns out that it's actually a bunch of, really cool, kind artists who are like, yeah, welcome. This isn't that scary.
Yeah, and times have changed, and again, I think that goes to like the folks like us who've gone through certain things. Like my first night in AMDA, there was a shootout under my roof. into my window on
Nice.
72nd and
Yeah.
Broadway before my roommate arrived, and I just was like, "What am I doing
You're like, where am
here?"
I and how quickly can I get home?
But it goes to the people who had those experiences going, okay, like how can we make this not so like it's New York and you are what 18, 19 years old
Yes.
and
Yes.
let's get you more used to this. Um, so yeah, it is interesting now in the conservatory setting, they are doing a lot more here, go be in this, go perform this. They're being encouraged to perform as much as possible. Is that correct?
Again,
If
we're a
that's
little different. We
okay.
are a little different. Yes, with a caveat. So for us, we some schools, some musical theater training programs, either a BFA or a certificate program, they vary on whether or not they want to get their kids out and on the stage and get them auditioning and get them out into the real world, or if they want to focus more on their training. We lean more toward focusing on the training. So like freshmen
Right.
don't perform. We're not one of those schools where students are not allowed to perform. There are some conservatory programs where you are forbidden, like you don't
Yeah.
perform outside of their school. You don't audition, until you have graduated.
Right.
We split the difference a little bit, particularly in the junior and senior year. We want them to get out and start feeling like what this is going to feel like, but at the same time, again, particularly for their freshman and sophomore year, we want them to focus on their training. We find that we get a lot of students auditioning for us simply because of the location.
Yeah.
So they're thinking, they've got stars in their eyes. They're like, okay, I'm going to get into one of these New York schools and I'm going to, audition and hit it big on Broadway like the first week I'm there. And then I don't even need to go to school
Right.
anymore. And listen, it happens for like
Right.
one in a million. It's
Right.
still sort of a one in a million kind of situation where that might happen for a kid. But what we always sort of counsel our prospective students, whoever they may be, 4 years is actually not that long a period of time in a young performer's life.
No.
From like 17 to 21, 18 to 22, your type in the industry is in all likelihood not going to
Very tiny.
change a whole
Right.
lot. So if you can kind of breathe a little bit, take those 4 years to get a degree, which will serve you well in the future no matter what you do, whether you want to go on for your master's or whether you just want to hold a college degree, regardless of what the major is. Because, an undergraduate degree in our world right now, with rare exception, it doesn't really matter what you majored in. If you have an undergraduate degree, that's either going to be enough to get you the job that you need,
Right.
or you're going to need to go on for a master's or a PhD or an
Right.
MD or a law degree or whatever. It's a stepping stone, right? So you have that BFA degree, but also you have 4 years of training. You have this kind of platform for longevity. You have training in acting, training in dancing, training in voice and speech and your singing voice. You know how to operate your instrument well and how to care for your instrument. I
Right.
mean, those were things, going back to what we talked about in the very beginning, I had no
None
idea.
whatsoever.
None. So, probably most of the injuries that I suffer from now are from misuse of my body in my 20s when I was really going at it. Like,
Yeah.
I had no idea about how to take care of my voice.
Right.
I ended up,
My first semester of college, we took, Alexander technique, and I found out I was breathing wrong for the first
right,
18 years of my life.
right, like things that you're like, wait, there's a wrong
I,
way to breathe? Like, I think I've been doing it well enough to stay alive thus far. There's a difference?
but
Like,
apparently not.
apparently not. Yes. And then when I worked for Disney Cruise Line when I was 23, I did the very first Disney Magic. That was a scene. I opened the original Disney Magic and a
Okay.
show called Disney Dreams where I played a 12-year-old. It was basically like the Wendy character in Peter Pan, but
Hmm.
she was like the contemporary version of Wendy. So her name was Anne Marie, and instead of her going out the window to Neverland, all of the characters came in.
Yeah, okay.
They brought all of the characters into Anne Marie's bedroom. And so she got to sing like either the beginning or the end of all of the Disney princess songs. And then it would be like she'd start it and then Ariel would come up,
Right.
from the stage and finish.
Right.
Or Belle would start singing and then she'd whisk away and then Anne Marie would finish Belle's. So it was a very fun role to play, but I talked in this little kid voice for like a year. And I had no idea that I was basically destroying my voice, my
Right.
speaking voice. It wasn't my singing voice that was the problem. It was my speaking voice in that high, kind of pinched
Hmm.
little kid voice. And I ended up with nodes when I
Hmm.
was 23. And I was like, and I had never had problems singing in my life. So that was like a
Right.
terrifying. I had to go get scoped. I went to vocal therapy, and the vocal therapist was like terrifying. She was great, but terrifying.
Right.
And she was like, yeah, no, it's not your singing voice. It's your speaking voice. It's you talk in this little kid voice. Even when you're talking to me, you're in this kind of up, high, that's killing your voice. So I was like, oh, like who knew that like my speaking voice is actually down here? Like it's not up here like this,
Right.
which is helpful for voiceover, which is helpful for animation.
Right.
But there's when you're doing that straight for a
Constant.
year on
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
ship and
Big.
you're not breathing properly, you're not hydrating, you're just doing it. Yeah. I caused some damage to my instrument that perhaps I would not have done if I had actually had any sort of training.
Right. And that's important to do because especially when they're young, like right now, imagine my wife is choreographing Hadestown at a high school right now, and they were working with the kid playing uh the Patrick Page role. Anyway,
Yeah,
it
I
was
can't think
like,
of the name of it, but
you are not Patrick Page. Do not try to be
don't
Patrick
try to be.
Page.
Exactly. Don't
You're
imitate his voice.
16.
Right.
We're gonna do this the way your voice does this. And
Yes.
I'm 54. I can't do Patrick Page. Nobody can. He is one of a
Right.
kind. Don't try to do that.
And
Yeah.
that's what kids instinctively do. They
They
want
want
to
to mimic.
imitate the
Right.
recording. They want to sound just like I used to do that too. I was like,
No,
oh, I can sound just like, Eponine and Les Mis. I can sound just like, but instead you're just kind of creating this, false impression and it's
right.
not authentic. But what did I know? Again, I knew none of that. So that was the way I learned was by mimicking.
Right. I mean, I could say the first show you and I did together, Mystery of Eddie and Drood, I was just trying to be the guy on the album the whole time.
I was
That was
trying to be Betty Buckley. I was like, I am going to try to belt a high E. Like I didn't know that that
right.
was difficult. I just was going to match her
Right.
pitch. And
Exactly.
that's what I did. That was how I auditioned for it. I was like, singing the writing on the wall,
Right.
like and I didn't know that belting a high E was hard because I
Right.
just did it. I was mimicking that sound,
Right.
So it's like which you can do for a while when you're a kid. And
Right.
then when
And
it
and
starts to catch up with you, you can't do it anymore.
one of the things that Jim taught me about also is I was lucky enough where I was good at accents and English accents and
Oh
stuff like
yeah.
that. So I was able to incorporate that really rapidly. Not
Yep.
just that one, but I was always very good at all kinds of, Russian, French, everything. I can just kind of do it.
Well, you had a good
You know,
ear. You had a
you
musical
know,
ear and you had a good ear.
right.
So that's
So
that's helpful. You can pick that up.
right. And I think in these settings, it's all about letting those students know this is how you do this. You're good at that. Now take advantage of that. You know, um, it's different. So one of the things I wanted to point out where I work now, I work at Duke University, and it took me, I've been there a long time, but when I first started there, now coming from New York, I was used to the Tisch School of the Arts, Boston Conservatory, all those, conservatory programs that were around at the time. When I went to Duke, I just was like, this is different because first of all, it was ridiculously small program. Their theater studies program. It still is pretty small, but it took me a good 5 years to go, oh, this is not the same. It's not wrong. It's just not the same
It's
approach at
different.
all. It
Absolutely.
was much more, I mean, it's not that way now, but when I first started working there, you could get a degree in theater studies at Duke and never take an acting class and never take a directing class or a writing class, which to me was like, oh, what? You can't
So it
do
was
that.
more of like a almost like a theater history
It,
degree,
it
or
was
like a
definitely,
BA. It was
it
definitely
was,
a Bachelor of Arts, right?
and to this day, they have an intense focus on the words and the research
Sure.
of the history of where that play came from or
Hmm.
whatever it is. There are separate, there's a lot of student organizations that do the musical theater stuff more
Right,
than the department. But although the department does occasionally do a musical,
right,
but again, it's very much it just took me a while to understand, oh, okay, is because for a while it was like they're doing it wrong. They're doing it wrong. And it was like, no,
right,
and it's like, no, they're not doing it wrong. They're doing it this way. And there's different ways to do this. And eventually I finally went, oh, okay, and now I see what we're doing. Now I can help get behind the faculty and see how I can assist them in their mission. Because we are very much where I work is part of student affairs. So it's very much a support in type of role with the students. We're giving them, I always like to say, we're giving them for the lab portion of their classes.
right, right,
you
right,
know
right. I mean that actually makes a lot of
yeah.
sense. Providence College was like that. I mean, I chose Providence because Brendan Burns went there and
Hmm.
he loved it. He
Right.
was a senior, when I was a freshman, and like the first show I did was with him at PC, but it was similar to what you're saying
Yeah.
in that there was a theater major, but I mean, maybe a couple more acting classes, but I think it was like 9 studio credits to
Yeah.
graduate. And
I
then
don't.
the rest was like lecture classes, tech classes. You had to do a couple of tech hours, but almost everything was, Shakespeare, contemporary drama, modern drama, Shakespeare's tragedy, Shakespeare's comedies. It was very academic.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's very funny because my godfather actually taught and worked at Providence for 40 something years. I mean, he
No
was,
way.
yeah, his
Did I know
same.
that?
I don't know the same name. He was the director of off-campus housing for a while, and then he taught theology. He was not a theater person. He was a theology professor, and taught a lot of those classes and stuff like that. Was very big
Uh,
on
I wouldn't
that.
be
Yeah.
surprised if our paths crossed because I
Oh,
used to work in residence life. That was my
yeah.
on-campus job.
It was funny because for many years, like we actually took pictures for a while of both of our student, our Duke ID and his Providence ID, and his email address was rich.kless@providence.edu, and mine was rich.kless@duke.edu. And I used to get stuff
Wow,
for him all the time, and I just
how
forward it to him
funny.
and go, "This is for you," and then
Probably for you.
he's like, "Oh, this is a lighting thing. This is must be
Must be for
yours."
you. That's really cool.
So, yeah. Um, all right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. That's going to be it for this first part of our episode with Rebecca Overton. If you like what you hear, please hit subscribe and join us again next week for part two. Until then, keep the faith.